Afternoon all. Let's have a look at another game from the Tal Memorial, another decisive game. One of my favourite players, unfortunately, again on the receiving end, this time of Vassily Ivanchuk playing black. So we've seen Vassily lose to Aronian in the previous video, but as black, Ivanchuk played actually in this game the Grunfeld defence, which I think it was like Zvidler was the main exponent of the Grunfeld before in this tournament. And in this tournament we have a lot of Grunfelds compared to, say, the Slav defence. Okay, and so Naka playing white plays actually d4, and the Grunfeld is chosen by Vassily Ivanchuk. Now, before getting into the nitty-gritty details of the game, I want to say something mysterious to you for you to think about during this game. And you might think some of White's moves were a bit odd, but it was actually quite deep how they were kind of tackled. And I just want to say this as a proposition, which you might find a bit strange. If you consider positional sacrifices as a way of enhancing your position, and they also emphasize things, could you also argue that where you have trump cards, potentially you have positional sacrifices available because you want to emphasize your trump cards? Would you say that's the case? Now, many of you may not have considered this idea at all conceptually, but in this game we're going to witness a couple of major potential positional sacrifices, and the basis of which are these kind of subtle trump cards. So bear that in mind. So at the moment we have main line Grunfeld, so d5, and now bishop f4, which seems to be a very solid response on a popular move head to play bishop f4. Bishop g7, and now e3. Now Vassily castled, and we have rook c1, and we seem to have, you know, a potential coordination of force on the c file potentially, and maybe, you know, if black's not careful, one would assume that also maybe sometimes, or exceptionally, that knight b5 might even be a threat, because this rook c1 implies, you know, c file pressure. The bishop on f4 implies c7 might be a liability. The subtle trump card that black might already have is this bishop outside of the pawn chain, like a London system versus the Grunfeld, might expose a potential weakness in theory on this diagonal. It's like examining Battlestar Galactica. Is there an Achilles heel in white's position? There's a tiny Achilles heel on this diagonal. If this bishop is outside of the pawn chain, how can this diagonal possibly be exploited though? Is that the basis for any positional sacrifice in the future in this position? Okay, well, for the moment that's a bit abstract and away from the game. Black releases the tension in the centre. Bishop takes c4, and now a strangely provocative, seemingly provocative move in the light of this discussion of coordinated piece pressure on the c file and on this diagonal, this bishop, this London system bishop pointing at c7. Vassily plays knight bd7, which initially one would assume doesn't do anything about any possible coordinated threat on c7. You know, what if knight b5? What can black do against knight b5? Isn't that going to be dangerous? A knight b5 possibility. But as I say, potential Achilles heel on this diagonal, and the white king still in the centre, hasn't castled yet, hasn't connected rooks yet, and so would it be a bit strange to play knight b5 on general principles, even though c7 does seem like an exploitable target immediately? And surely black could have the option of just moving the pawn anyway. Well, actually, in this position, funny enough, it seems Nakamura was tempted to try and punish this knight bd7. Now a stable move, as an example, might be, just trying to complete development. Say knight f3. We might end up with a typical kind of isolated queen's pawn position, where white's kind of basic trump card here in this kind of position would be still a pleasant bishop across the diagonal, pleasant pressure on the C and E files, and a pleasant E5 square. But black has a solid blockade on D5 against the isolated queen's pawn, and so we could say this is about equal. Now, the temptation, though, in this position was for Necker to seemingly try and exploit this knight bd7, and he plays a move which does look as though it's moving a piece twice in the opening, breaking old Tarash's dogmatic rule: don't move a piece twice in the opening, whatever you do. But it's far from clear here what the punishment for breaking a Tarash dogmatic rule would be. Okay, knight b5 was played. Okay, it's moving a piece twice in the opening. There isn't a rush to castle. Is this really, an Achilles heel for Battlestar Galactica? Is that really going to be a way to destroy the white position here? What does black do here about c7 anyway? What are the choices? And what are the actual threats anyway, even if the pawn moved? The pawn did move to c6, actually. Now c6 has the advantage of facilitating a potential tempo game with b5 later, hitting this bishop. For the moment now, there's two ways white could use now this access to c7, this coordinated pressure on c7. Either put the knight in there, or put the bishop in there. Putting the bishop in there forces the queen to move, and that was what was played. Putting the knight in there is no big deal, actually. If we put the knight in there to attack the rook could just move. And there's no real way, you don't really want to give up two pieces to win the rook, or force, play knight a6. Black would just munch that, and just munch again, two pieces for the rook, and of course black's better. That isn't the point. There's no point, it would seem, of knight c7. But let's just get an engine view just to make sure. In this position as white, the best move now does become either bishop c7, and the second just to retreat the knight back humbly, which giving black the advantage is just a complete waste of time. The bishop has to go all in now, bishop c7. So if there's a point, now it should be revealed. The queen's moved to e8 by force. And here it would seem that the point is already evidenced, because now the subtlety is evidenced that after knight c3, surely, absolutely surely, black is prevented here from playing a liberating move like e5, because this bishop to d6 would win the exchange, because the queen's hemming in the rook. If there was one advantage at all of playing bishop c7 to force queen e8, surely it's to prevent e5. Okay, but let's take the earlier premises. Is there a potential weakness in the white position? The white king is still in the centre. This diagonal is potentially a bit weaker than usual, because this bishop is not contesting it. It's having fun on this diagonal. Is there any kind of positional sacrifice which could exploit this potentially, dynamic trump card of this king being in the centre? Well, in fact, Vassily outrageously did play a highly dynamic move here. He played e5, literally provoking an exchange sacrifice. But Necker sensed some danger here. He was not tempted to win the exchange with bishop d6. So let's have a look at what is going on after bishop d6. What does black do here? E takes d4, and of course the king's in the centre, so e takes d4 is an illegal move now. So winning the exchange. Now there's a couple of options, either taking the knight or taking the bishop. Probably stronger, and I'll give you the PGN in the description of this video, is actually queen takes f8, leaving white with both options of ed, now that the queen's not pinning the pawn, or queen d4. And either way, it seems black's doing fine. Say queen takes d4, the dynamics seem to spring against white here. For example, queen takes d4, knight c5, which facilitates, a discovery possibility against the queen. So say the queen moves, and now this b5, which was facilitated by c6, tempo gaining, b4 knocking out some centralization of white, knight ce4, and all of a sudden there's compensation for the exchange already in evidence here. It's a bit abstract, but let's try and prove it. Queen f4 is suggested by an engine here, but what is going on here for, say, a natural looking move like knight f3 not to be playable? Surely just knight f3 is playable in this sort of position. If knight f3, apparently black is better here with bishop h6, as this shows, unless g4 is starting to save white. This is very but if g4 isn't played, what is going on here anyway? Say a natural move, then g5 is like trapping the queen. So the major threat after bishop h6 is g5 actually. So the queen's actually being boxed in. If we look at this in retrospect now, this ce4 is actually boxing in the queen, running out of options. It's only got f4 because the bishop's covering h3. This is very complex and technical. Then this central control leading to the queen boxed in on h4. But you might ask, well, did the queen have to go to h4? Was that the only possibility after knight c5? Let's try knight f3 here. So the exchange up, surely white has a reasonable position. b5. It seems again black has compensation somehow for the exchange. If he does rush the castle, leaving this discovery available for the queen to stumble back, then another tempo, knight takes c3, bishop d3, and black's forcibly winning back the exchange, probably with advantage. So it just shows that the queen doesn't seem to have too many safe places to run to without being punished. So even if it goes backwards, it's going to be punished. So this is a fascinating position, this exchange sac. It seems black is generating counterplay in this position after this exchange sacrifice. And let's have a quick look at e takes d4. Here, it seems this is about equal, this position. Queen b4, exploiting that kind of weakness I mentioned earlier, hitting two pawns in the process. If black can get a pawn for the exchange, even the b2 pawn, and get away with it, this looks to be a very pleasant position for black. The exchange down here, which I've documented as about equal. What is going on here? Black's the exchange down for a pawn, but the blockade on d5 seems very coordinated with all the pieces here, the d5 blockade. And although this is about equal, I suspect this is an easier position for black to play. It's on the verge of black being better here. For example, let's take it a bit further. Knight c3, queen b4, queen b1, queen a3. It seems black's got all the pressure, and if white plays a less than accurate move, somehow black is getting the advantage, even from a simple blockade on d5. So, say that knight's taken out, bishop takes is now threatening bishop f3, and it seems, I don't know, the exchange for the pawn, but black's doing well for some reason. Black has all the pieces active. It is for a pawn, and even if the queen's come off, this is very far from the game, but black seems to be doing well here. I think it's to do with the power of the blockade on the isolated queen's pawn that black's doing fine. Okay, but it's well away from the game. So in the game anyway, if we go back to the game, it seems e5, the logical thing must be to play bishop d6 anyway and face the consequences of the exchange sac. But Naka played a move which kind of kind of trusted Vassily that the exchange sack would give a lot of play. He played d takes e5, and as we know from some previous game annotations, even from way back in the Alekhine Bozolojbov matches, a move like d takes e5 is often losing because it's exposing d file pressure and the d3 and d4. These are all squares becoming weaker along the d file, and it seems this game is no exception. Black's getting a good game now after d takes e5. With that d pawn knocked out, Black can actually use the d file for unpleasant pressure. So Black's already kind of got a better position now, and he's chasing the bishop back. Unless White wants to give up the dark square bishop, the bishop's going back, and this bishop's coming out, and Black has achieves a tremendous position from the opening already. Black's slightly better, which is unheard of usually, at the GM level, for Black to reach a better position after about move 12. And it all stems from this kind of knight b5, which maybe was a little bit too ambitious, considering Black's potential for sacrificing the exchange, which seems to lead to murky, very complex positions, but maybe White should have played into that anyway. But here it seems Black has a small advantage. White played knight f3, knights came off, rook c8 chasing the bishop away. It can't go to d6 without going into a horrible, horrendous pin against the queen, so it stumbles back to g3. Now visually it looks as though, okay, these bishops look as though they might be handy anyway. But look, this d file's been broken into. Basically Black can start to pound on the pressure on the d file. In particular, d3 could be a major problem pretty soon. Knight e4, not concerned about another minor piece exchange. Now White's castled, leaving the knight there because he doesn't want his b2 pawn maybe exposed. Now rook d8, and we see, look, Black's carving into that d file, in particular d3. Queen a4, and the bishop actually goes into d3 with tempo against the rook. And now another positional kind of sacrifice to emphasize pressure, basically, which needs to be checked out as well. Another invitation to give Black even more play, and the invitation again rejected. b5 offering the a7 pawn now. So what's going on here? Why wasn't the a7 pawn taken? What kind of trump cards are being sort of emphasized now with this positional pawn sack? Let's have a quick look at queen takes a7. Say b4, knight stumbles on the rim. Okay, and we have here, in this position, there's a potentially strong tactical move which may have been seen by both players. Bishop c2. So trying to exploit the knight in the back row, slight weaknesses of the back row. I think that is actually the strongest move in this position, if the knight's forced to stumble to a4. Bishop c2. Okay, and what's happening after bishop c2? The thing is, this could lead to a queen infiltration on d2, which could be painful for White. So, for example, rook takes, queen takes, and this queen d2 looks pretty dangerous. If it's left for queen d2 to happen, I think White is in big trouble. White has to be prepared for queen d2. This rook e1 would prepare for it because now f3 is possible. But say White didn't prepare for queen d2 and played a move, just say giving the king some air, then I think queen d2 is giving Black an advantage. Say here, okay, we've got different moves, but Black clearly is better, it seems. Or could we argue this knight stumbling away from the centre? Was it the b2 problem as well? That's the problem. So say h5. Okay, Black's got a small advantage here anyway. If the white knight's tied down, and this b2 is going to be dropping off. But here it seems, it seems Black's better anyway. But this is again far from the game. So let's go back to the game. It seems queen d2 is unpleasant anyway and to be avoided. So maybe that's why the invitation here wasn't accepted to win the pawn. Instead, another declined invitation for material gain, Queen A5. But again, black is not bothered. He can just pile on a little bit more pressure now. He protects the pawn cheekily, and at the same time prepares potentially just Queen D8, offering the exchange of queens. So Rook D2 was played, Queen E7, and now the rooks, reinforce that bishop on D3. Okay, so white now plays A3. So with this move, Queen B4 is made possible, and if Queen takes B4, pawn on B4 might be useful for clamping down against A5 and C5. But does white really want double pawns here? That doesn't look like an ideal strategy. Maybe actually the main point could be just to prevent B4 to be able to avoid the knight having to move. After this next move, H5, actually let's test that. I don't think engines particularly like the move Queen B4 here, even if it does actually prevent H4, which now might be a threat. If Queen B4, maybe black just takes on B4. Actually, they might even be stronger. Taking on B4 is a small advantage, but actually C5 even stronger. Okay, so possibly the point of A3 is actually, let's try and deduce this, is probably to prevent B4. That's the major threat. Let's give white a different move, and if it's check B4, yes, B4 dislodging the knight, and something like Rook D5. This is given us better for black. So probably, yeah, it's to do with central control. That knight and this bishop being extended in scope, and B2 being a target. So A3 just to prevent B4 is probably the most likely reason. Okay, so H5, threatening to gain space, and maybe if the bishop moves, then H3 is dangerous, undermining white's king safety. So H3 to sort of prevent that. H4, H3. So H4 anyway. Bishop gets tucked in on H2, and now Vassily plays King H7. Okay, and then we have a forceful transaction. But what would white be doing here if he seems to be in difficulties? A lot of pressure on this diagonal. Both rooks holding up D3. The bishop sort of hitting thin air. The queen not really doing much here. So what does white do if he doesn't do anything forcing? He played a forcing move, bishop c7, but is it easy to suggest anything else that white can do here? Let's just check this position. Bishop c7 has given us one of the better moves actually. If he doesn't do anything, okay, let's just try King h1 as an example. What is black actually threatening? Say bishop c4. Let's say rook takes. Rook takes. I think black's actually threatening to use the d file, for example takes, and then get onto the d file. So for again this queen infiltration, maybe to d3 here, or queen f5. Queen f5. Actually that pokes into c2. There's pressure here. It's a small advantage. So anyway, maybe bishop c7 is in respect to the position, it's probably one of the better choices. So rook takes c7, so it's in effect an exchange of bishops, and white's left with a rook on the d file. So it doesn't initially seem that bad here at move 28, and this next move just reinforces h4 and gives the king g7. Is actually white much worse here technically? No, it's about equal here. If we're being very objective, it looks to be about equal even in this position. White does have that rook on the d file, so bishop c7 did have a purpose. So okay, after bishop f6, I think this next move might be suspect though. Rook d2, because it means actually that rook d7 is quite powerful. Instead of rook d2, this might be the case here for playing queen b4. Here queen b4, okay, accepting potentially double pawns might not be too bad, because the pawn is clamping down on c5 and a5. It's only slightly better for black. But instead it seems Naka gets a bit outplayed now after rook d2, rook d7. He doesn't want to invite the queen coming to d7 with his queen there blocked in by the knight, because then queen d2 does look like a serious threat invading on the d file. So the rook goes a bit passive, and black's now having possession of that d file all of a sudden, and this can be a major trump card, just possession of a file sometimes. Queen e6 now is quite menacing as well, threatening things like queen b3. So all of a sudden, white is under real pressure. He defends b3 now with queen b4, but then a decoy sacrifice is used here. I wonder if you can spot it. If I give you 10 seconds starting from now, what does Vassily play here? Okay, a decoy pawn sack, a5, just to try and get this queen b3 in. If queen b3, you can, hitting the rook and b2. If the rook moves, queen takes b2 looks pretty strong. So queen f4 was played, which kind of ties down potentially against queen b3. Maybe there's something like queen f6 going on here, but this needs to be investigated. In the game, king g7 was played, which is tighter, protecting the bishop. But if queen b3 here, I wonder if queen takes f6 is on the cards. No, actually there's even better. Forget queen f6. There's knight e4, offering the rook like that, and that's actually threatening a nasty fork against king and rook. So this would be about equal, this position. Rook takes c6, queen takes. White's doing fine here, absolutely fine. So Vassily plays a safer move then, king g7. Okay, and here actually knight e4 would be a disaster. I think just check, king moves, and then bishop e5, skewing the queen to the king. So rook c1, protecting the first rank. Now a4, clamping down on white's pawns, and okay, b4 is slightly weakened, but there's exactly no knight maneuver here to exploit b4 and use this c pawn here, because the queen's on a2. It's not like my blitz game recently against Yasusowan, where he makes use of a2 and gets knight b4 in, and my position crumbles because of c6. This isn't the case here. A4 is okay to play, and queen b3 represents a major strategic threat now. Now after queen b4, you might think, well, what about queen b3 here? In fact, the move rook d3 was played, but queen b3 immediately, is that any good as well? Let's just check this one. Queen b3 was mentioned as one of the moves which might be good. Queen b3, it's still okay for black here, but maybe rook d1 in this position. But still, even in this position, it seems rook a7, slight advantage to black. So what's going on here? There's a threat of bishop c3 and rook a3, so say defending against that. c5 looks like a tactical idea. Knight takes b5. Now rook d7, and again black seems to be doing well here tactically. So it seems a very delicate situation. These pawns are on dark squares, right for the bishop to take as well. But in the game, something horrible was about to happen actually. Rook d3 was instead played, and after rook c2, a very forcing and strong move it seems. Queen b3, forcibly getting the queens off. Queen's now, forking queen and rook, and the rook's pushed on to the first rank. And now another forcing move, bishop takes c3, like docking computer on. And there's an outrageous forcing move to consider here. Rook takes c3, which only would work if rook b3 wasn't possible. So guess what black plays now in the light of this outrageous idea of rook takes c3. He actually plays the move c5. He's trying to get a pawn to c4 to make sure that that sacrifice is going to work. And in fact, it's difficult, it seems, for white to do anything against this proposed sacrifice, this potential sacrifice. What does white do here? I think this might actually be a lost position after c5. It looks like -3 here. It looks actually like a lost position. A very, very bad position indeed. So he's gone downhill. His position's gone. After king f1 c4, the sac is now on, and it's actually played in the game. Rook takes c3, forcing white really to resign. It looks hopeless, these two connected passed pawns, if the rook moves. If it takes, then of course b2 is absolutely working now without any rook b3 to interfere with the pawn. So a very interesting dynamic game played by Vassily. And it seems, let's go in overview and summary of this very complex dynamic game. So there's very subtle trump cards which are kind of emphasised by a couple of positional sacrifices on black's part. The first one, the offer of an exchange sacrifice, which wasn't taken up. And instead, white plays d takes e5, so he's giving in to black's will, really, leaving black with a slightly better position at the opening. Black's not only just equalised as black, but even slightly better. And that d3 square is a bit of a problem as well. It's actually literally occupied with a bishop and doubled up against, and even this pawn sack is offered to dislodge this knight. But the pawn sack is not accepted as another material winning investment opportunity. Instead, queen a5, and again black is able to build on his position. Actually, he doesn't play queen d8. I know I mentioned queen d8. I wonder, actually, queen d8 might not be as good as what was played. Let's just check queen d8 here. Well, it might be a reasonable move. Okay, queen b4, a5. Black's still doing okay. Queen b8 might actually be a reasonably good move, but this is good as well, just to double the rooks, to support that bishop on d3. Even though there's a potential decoy of bishop c7 available to black, which is used very shortly now, bishop c7. So in this transaction, a white rook is left on the d file, and it seems okay. But this subtle little blunder here puts white in a bad position. If white had taken the opportunity of queen b4, maybe he could still draw this position potentially. From an engine point of view, it doesn't seem that bad, queen b4. But having to accept the double pawns, okay, they look a bit ugly, but they're functional. But instead, rook d2 lets black get more higher quality pieces, and the rook on c2 is a very passive looking rook. So now we have queen e6, a menacing queen as well. Queen now comes back to b4, but it's a bit late, and now a decoy pawn sack, dynamically played by black, reinforces now against knight e4s with king g7, with knight e4 not being possible because of check and bishop e5. And now a4 clamping down on white's pawns, and it starts to get a bit horrible now after what was played queen b4. Maybe this is a blunder which doesn't really help because it's asking for queen b3 at the right opportunity. Rook d3, putting more pressure on c3, and now we have docking computers turned on, time for forcing moves from a positional point of view, just trying to get a winning passed pawn. So another forcing move, we've got a winning passed b pawn potentially. When rook takes c3, we'll just emphasise that final trump card in black's position. Okay, I hope you got something from this game. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.